Hello, everyone, and welcome to another in the podcast series, Perspectives on Leadership. And today I'm pleased to have with me John Murabito, someone that I had the pleasure of working with in the past, and it's great to connect with him again today. Before we get into his perspectives on leadership, I'd just like to ask John to just say a few words about his background. John, welcome.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Good to be here. So my background, most of my career, I was a chief HR officer. I retired from Cigna Corporation as the chief HR officer about 1 year ago, after being there for almost 20 years in that position. Prior to that, I was the chief HR officer at Monsanto, which is where you and I became acquainted. And then before that, I was with PepsiCo for quite some time. And, also in a variety of human resources roles. Along the way, I did some other things. I had enterprise marketing for a while at Cigna. I ran communications, real estate, the Cigna Foundation, a number of areas kind of within an administrative umbrella. I have a master's degree in labor relations. That's the basics.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, you've obviously got a wealth of experience, and I'd be very interested to hear some of your stories as we get into the questions. The first question is where you personally have had to demonstrate significant leadership in order to create a breakthrough. Could be a major milestone experience for you, and something that you think back on, even I may have been some time ago now, but something that you recall quite vividly. Can you give an example?
Sure. I have I think a pretty good example, actually, and it was a while ago. It was some years ago that I was in a situation where we were encountering a CEO succession opportunity, and in this particular situation, there was a board of directors that I think was probably at that time more interested in making a decision based on kind of emotion and familiarity versus fact and science. Okay. And so in this particular situation, I had to really insert myself in a way that at the time felt a little challenging. I had the help of the sitting CEO and support, but I really had to insert myself with process and fact and science to do the best I could to help make sure that in this case the board would make a not just a right decision but a fair decision. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you in that particular situation, I wasn't the most popular for in this case for suggesting a process other than what some members of that board of directors really wanted to do on their own. But as it turned out, we put a process in place. Decision was made based on fact and science and real information, and a good decision ultimately was made. But I can tell you honestly, I don't want to say it was necessarily a career risk, but it was close to that, and I was not very popular with a number of board members. Actually, even after a good decision was made.
Well, it reminds me actually of the film. I don't know if you know it. It's an old film called The 12 Angry Men. Which is a jury case where one single person has to persuade all the other ones to make the right decision. Yeah. And I was just wondering, was it challenging to get them to agree actually on the process as well to actually evaluate the candidate?
Yes. It was, Tony. I mean, I think at that time, left to their own devices, that the process would have been kind of only discussion at the board level and probably made with incomplete information. So, putting a process in place that was harder work, was going to take longer, involved people probably outside of the board, kind of went through, some time that was going to need to take place versus what it might have been with just their own points of view. Yeah, it was a challenge, and it was as much about process as it was about the actual decision.
And did the process take a long time? Was it kind of several weeks or months before you could actually finalize things, and therefore people were getting impatient, or not?
Oh yeah, it took a while. It was probably I think once they in this case got into actual decision mode where they knew that they were going to have to make a call. It was probably a 3-4 month process. As information was generated, interviews were done, profiles were made of candidates, things of that nature. So absolutely, it took a while.
So hearing you speak, it sounds as though clearly it was awkward, a bit uncomfortable, risk-taking, a bit of courage necessary to face up to the board, particularly when you were maybe the only voice in the room who was suggesting something different. So would you say there's some of the characteristics, when you reflect on it, some of the characteristics about that experience?
I don't want to sound vain, but I think in that case, yes. It was managerial courage. It was some guts. It was kind of stepping a little bit outside of the, maybe my comfort zone to some degree. And and it was a little bit of a, kind of a solo voice of I thought reason in terms of making a really important decision for, the future of the company at that point.
My second question is actually where you've observed someone else making a significant leadership decision or action, and where you think it did also create a breakthrough. Can you think of one?
Yeah, when people ask me that question, one always comes to mind. So, if I think back when in my days at Frito-Lay, which was a division of PepsiCo, and I was probably at that time kind of a director level in HR, and we had been through a couple of different CEOs of Frito-Lay, and eventually a gentleman by the name of Steve Reinemund took over as CEO. He eventually went on to become chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, but in the few years that he spent at Frito-Lay, I thought he was just a superb leader. And the thing he did that at that time that I felt like was really interesting and smart and challenging for the organization was he had a really unique way of setting goals that were almost to the impossible, but not quite. So when he would put goals out there, people would kind of react to them like, oh my gosh, how will we ever hit this? But then he would put the goals out and he would put the resources in place, the training necessary, the investment, the support, all the things that were really required to hit very high goals. Steve was great at putting out. So he could put out really incredibly challenging goals, and at the same time be ultra supportive of the organization in order to allow the company to hit the goals. In fact, I remember one year, we were in a pretty good situation already as a company, as a division of PepsiCo, and he came up with this kind of thing called 15-20-60, and basically what it was he wanted 15% revenue growth, 20% earnings growth, and a 60% share in the United States. And people reacted like, oh my gosh, we can never hit these goals. They're so hard. But, he put in the resources, the support, the investment necessary, and the encouragement of people that allowed the company to achieve the goals, or get pretty darn close anyway.
My final question is about the future. What would be your perspective on what is required of leaders going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm actually doing some consulting these days, and most of it is in the area of kind of senior leadership and and talent. And so it's a question that many people are asking as they consider, who to put in jobs, who to put in senior jobs, and so forth. And so the thing for me that I think, I look for, and I think that separates really great leaders from good ones, are things like authenticity and humility and listening skills, and really being able to kind of interact and relate to people at all levels of an organization in a way more meaningful way than what's been done before. I think employees today, whether it be of companies or other organizations, they're looking to be listened to in a much deeper way than what they ever have before. They're looking to have their organization be focused on some kind of a mission, some kind of good, beyond just making money. They want to have a voice, and they really want to feel like they're part of things, whether that be on social issues that have come up, or even just on kind of issues within the organization. And so I think the best leaders are ones who can emphasize the mission and connect people to hopefully the mission of the company, and who are really deeply empathetic and feel to employees like they're authentic and they're humble, and they actually want to be good listeners and to pay attention. So I don't know, that might be kind of old school, Tony, but that's for me, that's one of the big things in leadership that I think will be important going forward, even more so than it has in the past.
Well, actually, I think it's very relevant, because a previous conversation I had, we were talking about leading and leadership, and that regardless of what the situation is, there are certain things that leaders need to be able to do. I think one of the things that leaders need to be able to do is build trust. Yeah. And unless you have the trust of the people, you can't really get very far.
I agree with you completely. I mean, 100%. I think building trust of employees is really important. And, people are smart. I mean, they can see through leaders who are fakes, and they know those that are sincere. And so, I think it's, regardless of where you are in the organization, you need to make sure that people feel valued. And I think that's what's most critical.
John Murabito, thank you very much for your time today. Great talking to you. Thanks for your perspective.
Of course. You're welcome, Tony. Thanks for asking me.